Hi, I'm poet and writer Kay Spivey, and today we are going to talk about delivering on the promise of the premise. Now, I'm not sure if Alexa Dunn coined that phrase, but she's definitely the one that I've heard it from. And I want to talk to you about it specifically because I just finished reading Wayward Son, which is the sequel to Carry On, which I gushed about. I have gone on so many gush rampages already in the month since I've read this book. Wow, it's like cat time all of a sudden. Look, here's Pie on this side. Say hi. So I read Wayward Son, the sequel to Carry On by Rowell, and I didn't like it. Let's just start in. I liked it for the most part, but it did one thing that I felt in the end was basically inexcusable, and that's that it did not deliver on the promise of the premise, which got me thinking about this and why that is so vitally important to the satisfied feeling you leave with in a book. Now, books can end on cliffhangers, totally fine. I think a really good example I would say would be the Lord of the Rings movies. Think about the progression of the movies. Now, you always have the One Ring lingering over you. You always have having to get it to Mordor lingering over you. That does not get solved from point A, B, C between the three movies. But you wrap up the internal conflicts of each movie completely while leaving you with the task still at hand. For example, in the Fellowship of the Ring, the Fellowship faced their breaking point. Everyone is asked to face, are we going to continue on or not? And all of them make a different choice, or the choice is made for them in the case of Merry and Pippin. Frodo and Sam decide that they must go off on their own, and they're going to continue on with the original quest, the bringing the ring to the fires of Mount Doom. Merry and Pippin get carried off, obviously Boromir dies, and then Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli accept the fact that they are no longer the Fellowship, and that their task now is to rescue Merry and Pippin, and so they are preparing for the next task. And so you leave then the story with the whole arc of the Fellowship finished. The Fellowship is broken. The Fellowship is no more. But each of the characters has now been presented with a new task, which they will then carry on. That's a decent cliffhanger. You want to go and see what are they going to do next, but you're left with a satisfied feeling of the Fellowship has finished. Then you get into the Two Towers, and this is it's a building story, and usually third movies really fail, and I would say the Two Towers is maybe the strongest film in the Lord of the Rings series. Arguably, I really enjoy it. In this story, Frodo and Sam move to the gates of Mordor. Everyone gets to the gate, and they also gain specific strongholds and allies that are going to help them in the next quest. You have the entire arc of gaining those strongholds and allies, as well as making it to the final threshold. And then the next movie, we're going to start from the final threshold and work our way in. So you already know at the end of the Two Towers what's going to be happening then in the Return of the King. So you see how that can be really well done. And let's say, for example, how it wasn't really well done, using a movie again. Let's talk about the shit show that was the recent 3 Star Wars movies. Could you have reasonably predicted any of the things that were going to happen in the next movie from the previous one? No, it's impossible, because they didn't have a clear overarching goal, even though one would think it was to take over, to destroy the First Order. That wasn't really what it ended up being or what happened. It just wasn't. When you're left on cliffhangers then, let's say for example, Luke Skywalker dying in the second one. You are left with this moment where Rey is really coming into her own. She is showing herself as a particular force within the Force, and also that the Force could be within everyone. Beautiful cliffhanger at the end of that movie, by the way. I really do think that as a movie itself, although it had many plot holes, they were sci-fi style plot holes. They're things that I accept in Doctor Who and I accepted in Star Wars. I thought that all of that was a really good cliffhanger. You've now gathered the group back up because they've been split different ways. Something specific has happened. There's been specific rises and downfalls, and now we have a new plan. Now we are this ragtag group and we have a new place we're going. And then all of that falls through in the third one, and that's terrible. Okay, so there's a bad example. let's get into Wayward Son and why this was terrible. And now I'm not going to particularly spoil Wayward Son. If you haven't read Carry On, then this might be kind of spoiler. If you're intending to read Carry On, maybe this isn't the video for you. I'm going to be talking, this isn't like a teaching you what the promise of the premise is particularly. This is really like going through examples. If you don't want to be spoiled for Carry On, I'm going to a little bit. I don't think this is going to be spoilery for Wayward Son at all, partly because there's not really anything to spoil. The only thing I'm going to say here is what the promise of the premise is, and then to inform you that that does not go anywhere. If you feel like that's a spoiler, you can leave the video now. Okay, so Wayward Son, obviously it's a sequel to a book where the end game was the relationship forming between Simon and Baz. That's what we went into it for. That's what happened in the end. Happy couple, great. Now, obviously, they were not left in the best mental health situation. So I was like, okay, great. Going into the book, going into Wayward Son, we knew that there was going to be, specifically for Simon, depression. And actually, she characterized depression in a really familiar way, in a way that I thought was really well done in the beginning. It was insta-cured and never brought back up again. And so that was really annoying. But that's not really what the whole thing is. You go into the book with a certain expectation. Simon and Baz are now in a relationship. The book throws a curve at you right, I think like in the first chapter, that Simon is thinking of breaking up with Baz because he doesn't think he's good enough. And he doesn't think that he himself is good enough for Baz, and he wants to break up with him before Baz has a chance to break up with him. So that you're given that right away. And so that's lingering over you. That to me was the promise of the premise in this book. The promise that Simon and Baz were going to have to really look at their relationship, that their relationship might be in danger. And we literally get to the end of the book, the epilogue of the book, and that's still the question hanging over us. It is not wrapped up in any way. Their relationship is barely shown. Let's be honest. It's sparse. There are times when you would forget they were in a relationship. Like this, I don't think this book was ready. It needed like 4 or 5 more chapters just to wrap up the plot of what had just happened. The like big end spectacle. It needed more chapters just to wrap that specific thing up. Dropped that completely. And then left us with exactly the same question that it started us with. There is a thing, and especially in poetry, there's a really beautiful thing of coming back around to the same thing. And I love writing in this style. Maybe it's become annoying for other people who read my poetry, but I love starting with like a similar image to the one I'm ending with, where I visualize it as an hourglass. Okay, so you see an hourglass, and you start with the sand on the top, and it trickles down slowly, which is, you know, the body of the poem, the conflict, the tension, because it's the tight part, and it comes back down, and in the bottom you have the same sand, and you could tip that back up again, and the sand could come cascading down in a slightly different way. That to me, I love that style for poetry, and I love it in books. There's a really satisfying feeling. That's the reason that in a classic hero quest you'd go on the adventure and then come back home. There's just a lot of satisfaction of coming back to the beginning again. Now, this can be done a lot of different ways. This could be done very literally, it could be done very figuratively. You also have things like, let's say Rapunzel, the Disney movie Rapunzel, where she's stolen as a baby, and then in the end she's reunited with that family she was stolen from. She's reunited with the concept of family, with finding her home, her true home again. That's a very satisfying thing. It feels really good. However, coming back to exactly the same question with no answer and no way for us as the reader to answer the question on our own, I think is unacceptable. It leaves a really bad taste in your mouth. And not only that, but Wayward Son then chucked in a totally random other cliffhanger that I cared 0% about, because nothing else, like, why the frick would I care about that new, bizarre, tossed in, off the wall cliffhanger when all I wanted was to be answered the question that had been left for the whole book I read through, and they never got back to that one thing. And other problems aside, I could go on and on about, actually a friend of mine wrote not a very nice, but a very detailed rant about how she felt about Wayward Son that I'll just link it below because it was pretty good actually. And it touched on a lot of things that I thought were really particularly important. Like, Penny had just gone to America with her dad to study dead spots and yet didn't know anything about America or that they had dead spots. And I was like, have I forgotten? Like, did I make this up? I clearly remember that that's what she had been doing and why Simon hadn't seen her the previous summer at the beginning of Carry On. I'm sure that was it. I don't know. There were a couple things where it was just like, I just read Carry On and I feel like I'm remembering things that the author isn't, which is maybe a whole other problem. But we're going back to where we're actually talking about, which is that promise that we're going to find out. And you know what? If they had broken up at the end, if that had just been it, if they had definitely broken up, there'd have been I've been devastated, I'd thrown the book across the room, but there'd have been a satisfaction to that. That, okay, now in the next book, we're starting with them broken up. Rather than we're starting with them the exact same freaking place. They didn't need to go on this whole quest. There was very little growth that happened. There was no point. And that's kind of the problem. You get to that ending and all the things that happened are really for naught because there was no answer to the first question, the question that drew you into the story. And it's vital that if you present a question, which you should, good writing should present some kind of problem or question, that it gets resolved in some kind of meaningful way. And that, again, is not to say you can't do a cliffhanger. It can be done beautifully well. But the cliffhanger should have been, can they get back together again? It should have been, can they do this other bizarre, random, totally off-the-wall, bonkers thing that popped up all of a sudden at the end that made no sense to anything else that had happened? Or are they going to decide to stay? There are all kinds of cliffhangers you could have had, but it never should have been the precise same one from the beginning. I think there is a way perhaps that could have been done well and satisfyingly, but it would have taken the book really driving home the relationship between them. And as I mentioned earlier, it just didn't. You would have forgotten they were a pair, and other characters around them weren't really sure they were a couple many times either. And I was just like, you know what? Same. And it's not that organic, especially because a lot of it stemmed from very simple communication issues. And in the first book, it was very much established that even though they don't necessarily communicate well with others, they communicate quite well with one another. So that's completely fallen off, and then you're going to insecure the depression that was the only thing that could have been the cause for it. Like, I don't know. I don't like having to infer all of the answers in a book because I'm reading a book and you're supposed to tell me the thing, or you're supposed to give me all of the information I need to infer something. So, for example, the scene that's supposed to have been the big rift between the two of them is never given to us. Both of them mention it very briefly in trailing off sentences, and that was infuriating, to be honest, because not being shown that, then that becomes the worst part of the whole book to me, actually. Thinking back on, we missed that whole scene, so we don't know why this is happening. We don't know what either of them feel about it. We don't know what it's going to lead to, because now at the end, we're in the same place we always were. It's a very unsatisfying feeling. Our jobs as writers is to come back around and make people feel that feeling of satisfaction, whether it's a good satisfaction or a bad satisfaction. Let's talk about someone who also did this type of scene quite well, I would say, and that would be actually Cassandra Clare. Very similar situation. Now this was with the side characters, but somehow her side character relationship between, I'm talking about Magnus Bane and Alec, in the book where they break up. Yes, okay, that's probably a spoiler. Big spoiler alert. It's fine. other things happen. I feel like these books have been out long enough and you're already here, so let's keep going. But anyway, so very beautifully, their relationship is set up with problems with communication. Now, to the credit of that book, one of the characters is much older and more mature, and when it comes down to their life being threatened, they're much more capable of standing up for themselves, especially in addressing what they recognized as a bad situation. Whereas Simon and Baz are both young, and you can give them that. Cassandra Clare set up the breaking up between Alec and Magnus in a really well thought out way. She first set up the problems with the communication right from the start, first thing, and then slowly bled in some jealousy that we see very clearly and is very much on the characters' minds all the time, which is very important. It should always feel like the main struggle and problem is on the character's mind. It shouldn't feel like they're distracted by every single thing, like they're just kids running around having fun. Like if there is a problem in their mind that we are meant to think is the main problem, it should always be on their mind. And it never leaves Alec's mind, and so it is always also on Magnus's mind, which then every time you're back in either in their perspective, you're worried about it. And it comes slowly, and you know that it could be coming, but when it hits, you aren't expecting it. You're thinking, oh no, they can work through this. But no, at the end of the book, same kind of thing. There's a brief moment for a confrontation, and she goes ahead and doesn't pull the punch. And it's important not to pull the punch. If you're going to hit your reader with something, to make them feel something, just do it. Because you can come back, as she did, and you can get them together again later. But you need to force them to work through what has obviously become a problem, because you have obviously shown it to be a problem. If she was just not going to do that, if it was not going to be a thing in Wayward Son, if they were not going to not end up together, or I say end up together, if they were not going to break up, then she shouldn't have presented as a question right away, since it doesn't happen, and since we don't get anything. They might as well have just been friends, and you could have been like, well, the relationship didn't really work out, and now we're just friends, and it'd been the same book. Now think about that. Anyone who's read Carry On and hasn't read Wayward Son, think about that they could have had a line that, oh, it just didn't work out, and the book would have read exactly the same. Actually, there might have been more tension. There might have been more of a longing feeling easily written in that case. I mean, it's frustrating. It's frustrating as a reader to get that far, to get to the end of this book, and it just drops off. And none of that is resolved. And all I'm thinking is, what was the point? And you do not, as a writer, want to leave your reader thinking, what was the point of the book? You wrote all that book. At the very least, you should have them feeling something other than like, what was the point of it? Why did I read that? Why didn't I just keep internalizing all the feelings of Carry On and all the beautifulness of that relationship? Why did I spoil it by throwing in this other whole thing where now there's this bitter taste left by there's not even like a will they, won't they? They didn't have a relationship in this book. They didn't do relationship things. They didn't act like a couple. The cutest scenes were between Baz and Penny. Yeah, I love them as friends, but this is not what I signed up for. And it's not what any of us signed up to this book for, because the book promises one thing and refuses to deliver on it. There's so many ways to avoid it, and so many ways to still give us that, either the cliffhanger moments or to give us that feeling of like devastation. There's so many ways to navigate it, and none of them were done. And it's not like it's rocket science. You just have to either shoot your shot or like get off the toilet. What is that? Yeah, shoot your shot and get off the can, whatever that stupid saying is. I feel as a writer you need to make a commitment to what you want to have happen and then to deliver that. Not to just, oh, it could be anything. Like, this is a problem with Glee back in the day, as the writers were like, oh, this writer did this, but I don't want to do that, I'm gonna do this other thing. Like, no. Such a problem in network television, but it's because of different writers. You are the writer, you make the decisions. Make those decisions and give them to us. Create a full arc, create a full plot. Now, I don't want to just make this like that I'm furious at Rainbow Rowell, although I'm a bit mad. I'm a bit mad about that ending. It was dumb. But some editor also okayed that. And it really shouldn't have been allowed. It wasn't good. The ending is so flat. I'm going to read the next book because Carry On was so good. Your second book should not need the third book in order to redeem itself from how poorly it stood up to the first book. Your second book should not be able to stand on its own, and Wayward Son cannot stand on its own. Aside from other problems, which I think people are perfectly capable of coming up with on their own, it's pretty obvious where other issues lie, especially ones where it's like, I'm not sure she remembered who these characters were between the writing of the first and second book. But besides that, not being able to deliver on the very first question that we're asked, the only thing we're reading this series for, whether or not these boys are good for each other and are happy and cute together. All I wanted was some hot and heavy coming in for these two boys who are now finally in a relationship, and if I wasn't gonna get that, I at least wanted them to like be looking at other guys, like something, and nothing. And there's nothing more frustrating than that. So anyway, that's been my ramble, my rampage. But I hope you understand, both from a writer and a reader perspective, how vital it is that if you make a promise, you ask a question, you say something's gonna happen with this, you damn well answer it by the last page. And if you're gonna have a freaking epilogue and then still not answer that question, bring it back up as the same question, that is the worst thing you could do. That is not following the hourglass model. No, that is just poor writing. And I'm very frustrated. And this is how I'm getting all that frustration out, is talking to all of you. Anyway, let me know what you thought. Did you also read Wayward Son and were frustrated? What do you think about delivering on the promise of the premise? Like, did my other examples make sense to you? Can you think of more examples where it doesn't come through, or maybe that it does come through, that the promise is delivered in a very satisfying way, even if maybe it isn't what you would hope for, which of course, obviously, would be the boys just being wonderful together and just super happy boyfriends, cutesy, cutesy, kissy, kissy. That's all I wanted. When are we gonna get more of that? Probably never. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, leave a comment down below, and I will talk to you again soon. And good luck to all of us, and especially to you. Bye.